For 3 whole years, a predator was operating in the shadows of Houston, Texas, getting away with a series of crimes so horrific that at the time, they were considered the absolute worst in American history. This is the story of the Houston mass murders, and it's about how one single violent act brought the entire nightmare crashing down. So, we're actually going to start this story at the end with this frantic phone call that just blew the lid off a 3-year killing spree. It was 8:24 in the morning, August 8th, 1973, and a teenager named Elmer Wayne Henley calls the Pasadena police with a confession. He just killed his mentor and his tormentor, and in doing so, he was about to expose a hidden graveyard of secrets. The events that led up to that phone call were this terrifying climax to years of abuse and murder, and it all unfolded over just a few hours. What happened was, Corll was absolutely furious that Henley had brought a girl over to his house. He ended up subduing all 3 teenagers, binding them, and then announcing, "I'm gonna kill you all, but first I'm gonna have my fun." Now Henley, in this desperate bid to survive, he convinces Corll to let him go, promising he'd help. But the second he was ordered to assault his friends, he grabbed Corll's .22 caliber pistol and shot him dead. So in just a few hours, a confrontation born from sheer rage and terror brought Corll's killing spree to a close, but it also opened the door to a story that was so much darker. So who was this man Henley killed? Well, Dean Corll was known to his neighbors in Houston Heights as a pretty familiar, maybe even harmless figure. But that public face, it was hiding a monstrous reality. Yeah, he actually earned the nickname the Candy Man. See, his family's candy business gave him this constant supply of free sweets for the local kids. It created this friendly reputation that let him build trust and get them to lower their guard. It was, the perfect cover. Corll used that reputation and a very carefully crafted system to lure, torture, and then murder his victims. He wasn't just some opportunist. This guy was a methodical planner who literally turned his homes into killing chambers. His process was just so cold and calculated. He'd lure boys to his house, sometimes using drugs or alcohol to knock them out. Then they'd be handcuffed and tied to the specially made plywood torture board. The assaults could go on for days before he'd finally kill them, either by strangulation or by shooting them. But this whole meticulous plan had one critical weak spot. He needed help. And that's where these 2 local teenagers come in. Corll enlisted David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley to basically act as his procurers. They were absolutely instrumental in helping him find and lure victims right into his trap. Both of these boys were drawn into Corll's world when they were really young. David Brooks met him at just 12 years old and was groomed to be his first accomplice, rewarded with cash, gifts, even a Corvette. Henley was brought in later, and he was told this lie that he was supplying boys for a white slavery ring, a total deception that masked the truly deadly nature of what they were really doing. And here's what makes this all the more chilling. The victims weren't random strangers. Brooks and Henley often targeted boys from their own social circles. They were betraying their own friends' trust, leading them to their deaths for cash. So Henley's confession would end up triggering one of the biggest forensic investigations in U.S. history at the time. Because after killing Corll, he didn't just admit to that one act, he started to unravel the entire web of murder. When the police actually followed Henley's directions, the true scale of the horror just became sickeningly clear. Henley led them to a boat shed Corll had rented, telling them it was a mass grave. And at the time, discovering that many victims made this the worst case of serial murder in American history. The bodies were scattered all across East Texas, buried in these shallow, lime-soaked graves. The boat shed alone held the remains of 17 boys, and more were found out in the woods near a family cabin and buried in the sand on remote beaches. This quote from an officer on the scene just captures that moment of dawning horror as they realized Henley's story was terrifyingly true. When Henley brought them to the boat shed, he was apparently so overcome he just staggered back. And the officer knew right then and there that they were standing on a tomb. So, with Corll dead, the legal system turned its focus to his 2 young accomplices. The man who orchestrated the whole thing would never face a trial, but the 2 teenagers who helped him, they absolutely would. Both of them did face justice. Elmer Wayne Henley, the one who actually ended Corll's spree, he was convicted on 6 murder charges and got 6 concurrent 99-year sentences. He's still in prison today and has been denied parole over and over. David Brooks, on the other hand, was convicted of one murder and sentenced to life, and he ended up dying in prison from COVID-19 back in 2020. And that leads us to the final haunting question. Do we even know the full story? Despite decades of investigation, the true number of victims is still uncertain. One of the boys found in that boat shed is still unidentified to this day, and both accomplices always insisted there were more bodies out there that were never found. So the case of the Candyman might be officially closed, but its horrors leave behind questions that, honestly, may never get answered.